In 1969, in a little place called Pass Christian in Mississippi, I was on the Gulf Coast, there was a group of people that gathered together and they were going to have a hurricane party. Now, if any of you have been to a hurricane party, I wouldn't recommend it, but these folks decided they were going to have a hurricane party, and they were in a really fancy apartment building that was about 250 feet from the shore of the Gulf Coast there. And the winds were starting to pick up and so forth, and they were having a great time having this hurricane party. And the police chief, his name was Jerry Peralta. He pulled up sometime after dark, and as he got there, a man stepped out onto the balcony holding a drink in his hand, and Peralta yelled up, he says, "You all need to clear out of here as quickly as you can. The storm is getting worse." And they just laughed at him. And another fella come out, and he was holding the drink in his hand too, and he says, "We're not leaving." He says, "This is my property, and we're not getting out of here unless you arrest us." Well, the police chief didn't arrest them, but he went in there, and he talked to each one, and he got names of next of kin from everybody in there, and that didn't bother these people. They just laughed, and they mocked him, and he got their names, and he left. And about 10:15, the storm hit its peak, and scientists measured the wind at over 205 miles an hour. These raindrops were coming down like bullets. The waves crested at somewhere between 22 and 28 feet high, and that three-story apartment building was all that was left was the foundation in the morning. And one survivor, a little boy clinging to a mattress. But warnings. They had a warning. They all died. The hurricane was the Hurricane Camille. But you know, how many of us ignore warnings? How many of us heed warnings when they come? I get a kick out of watching American television channels sometimes, and they seem every other commercial on there seems to be for some kind of new fancy drug. And then at the end of that drug, they'll tell you all of the side effects, hot dog fingers, may cause death, may cause suicidal tendencies. And I'm wondering, why would you take this drug? Like these possible side effects are terrible, all right? And they go on, but I wonder how many of us heed warnings when we see those things, or like those 20-some people in that apartment building just laugh at those warnings. We're in a solid brick building. Nothing can happen to us. Jesus gives us a warning in today's text that very, very few people heed this warning and listen to this warning. And as what Jesus frequently does when he gives a warning, he will give a little parable along with that. And it's kind of neat as we've been looking through the book of Luke. There's 24 chapters in the book of Luke, and by my count, Jesus actually gives 25 parables in the book of Luke. Of these 25 parables, 16 of these parables are only found in the book of Luke. Lots of times some of the parables are repeated in Matthew and in Mark, and not so much in John, but in those other synoptic gospels, we call them, the parables are repeated. But this particular one that we're going to look at today is one of the 16 that is only found in the book of Luke. But before we look at this parable, and more importantly, the warning that Jesus puts out, let's see why the topic even comes up. I'd like you to take your Bibles and come with me, please, to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. We see here, starting in verse number 13, it says, "And one of the company said unto him," and understand, this is the middle of the chapter. Jesus has already been talking. We'll look at that in just a moment here. But he says, "And one of the company said unto him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. And he said unto him, Man, who made me judge or divider over you?" This man interrupts Jesus so that he can get his inheritance. All right? Now, understand, God had laid down some guidelines for them in the books of Leviticus and in Deuteronomy. They're repeated, and it talks about ways that they should handle their inheritance, and it goes on about, a hated son and a son that's loved, and God says, no, you can't, you can't do that because you love this wife more than the other, and so forth. But basically what they would do is, how God set it up was the oldest child. How many oldest sons do we have here? We got a few oldest sons? Oldest child? All right. I wasn't. I was one of the younger ones. So the older ones, they got a preference. They got double what the younger ones would get. It was part of the blessing of the firstborn. There was the birthright and so forth, and they would kind of head up the family afterwards. But they would get double. So if there was 3 people in the family, okay, just to understand this, it would be kind of divided up into 4. And the oldest one would get 2 parts, and then each other one would get 1 part each, all right? And that's just how that it was set up. But culturally, they frequently didn't do that. What they would do is they would stay together as a family. This is how it was set up, okay? But what they would do is they would stay together as a family, and they would pool everything together, and they would just continue to work on and just carry on that farm or whatever that was, and the whole family would kind of stay there. We see that with Jacob, if you look at that, and you can see where all those, I realize Jacob is before the law and so forth, but understand where the families would stay together and kind of work together, and might have little houses all over the place in that little, not really a commune, but if you kind of understand how that's set up. But according to the law, it could be divided up, but more often than not, they didn't divide it up. And this fella here, he wanted it divided up. And he wanted his little piece of the pie, and he was going to go off somewhere else, which was completely legal to do, and it was set up that they could do that. But Jesus says, why are you bothering me with that? I'm not the divider of this stuff. Like that's and he looks at him, but I want you to understand, get the picture here. We looked at some of this last week. Jesus has been talking and teaching about some very, very, very important things. He's been talking about, last week we looked at how he said, be careful you don't want to fall into the leaven of the Pharisees in hypocrisy. And he talked about how much God cares for us. Right down to he knows not just how many hairs are on your head, but he knows each individual hair that's on your head. And he cares for every tiny little sparrow. That's how much God cares for us. And as Jesus is pouring his heart out and telling them, this is how much your God, who created everything, loves you, this man is just waiting for a pause in the conversation, and he can say, oh, by the way, can you tell my brother to give me what is owing to me? He's not listening to anything that's going on. And how often do we do that? How often do we do that? We come here to worship, and I'm up here preaching, and you're thinking about what we're going to do tomorrow. I don't want a show of hands, all right? But it happens. But I want you to see, this man had, he didn't care about all these great things that Jesus was teaching. And then Jesus pauses. We see there in verse number 14, rather, there that he's talking to him, and he said unto him. And then he turns to this crowd of people. There's a lot of people there. If we look back a few verses, we can see where it says there's so many people there that they were stepping on each other. And Jesus turns from talking to that man saying, who made me divider over you? He wasn't going to stop in the middle of what he was doing and take care of this man's inheritance and so forth. That's not why Jesus was here. It's not why he was talking to these people. But then he turns to everyone. Verse number 15. And he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesses. Take heed. Take heed. All right? We come on this and we see what Jesus is talking about here. He says, take heed about covetousness. And we look at covetousness and we think, that's not such a big deal. I mean, after all, when you look at the 10 Commandments, where is covetousness on the list of 10 Commandments? It's dead last. I mean, there's really important stuff at the beginning. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And then honor your father and your mother. And then he gets into the big ones, other big ones. Not as big as having God first. But that's where it starts. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. All right, well, those are bad, right? We have any murderers in the congregation this morning? No. Do you have any people that thought about killing somebody? No, don't put your hand up, all right? But the killing and adultery and stealing and lying. And then we get down to, well, covetousness. That's just kind of wanting something you shouldn't have, isn't it? I mean, when you look at when God puts it in His Word in Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5, and it lists the Ten Commandments, and we get to covetousness, and He gives some examples. You're not supposed to covet your neighbor's ox. Okay, well, in modern translation, that would be you shouldn't be coveting your neighbor's tractor. Okay, and then you shouldn't covet your neighbor's donkey. Well, that would be your neighbor's trailer, okay, for hauling stuff away. That's what they used back then. They used the donkeys to haul things, and the oxes, they were the, I don't know if they painted them green. I think they have a John Deere ox, all right? But, okay, so, but we're not supposed, and you're not supposed to covet your neighbor's wife. You're not supposed to covet your neighbor's servant, and so forth. Well, it's just, and we get the idea that coveting is just wanting, because it gives those examples, and that's absolutely true. But there's more to covetousness than just wanting something that somebody else has. Because what happens in this next parable has nothing to do with something that is another person's. All right? It's all got to do with where we put things. Where we put our value on what we have, what our possessions, or what possessions we want to have, or possessions we're going to somehow get. He says, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesses. Be cautious. Beware is to be cautious, to be alert of dangers. All right, the dangers that are there for coveting. We have our society says this about covetousness. It says because people want to keep up with the Joneses. Anybody know anybody named Jones? I know a couple of people named Jones. When we were when my dad had his first church up north, there was a family in our church, and their name was Joneses. All right, and you didn't have to keep up with the Joneses because they were the second poorest family in the church. All right, we were the poorest. Okay, but they were the second poorest. They had a daughter. I was thinking of this last night actually, and her name was Brenda, and she was the same age as my sister, Linda. I just have the one sister. One brother, one sister. She got lucky. She got two brothers. We both got stuck with a sister. But nonetheless, all right, we invited Brenda over for dinner at our house, okay? And we didn't have a lot, so dinner was hot dogs, okay? But my dad, he liked to have fun. And we had a rubber hot dog. And we slipped that into this poor little girl's hot dog bun, and she was told before she left home, you make sure you eat everything that they put before you. And this poor girl was strangling this hot dog bun, trying to get through this rubber hot dog, okay? And poor Joneses. My dad had another gag. I'll tell you this other one just for fun. First time that he met Lenore's mom, came over to their house, and he's in a suit, and in his pocket he waited until Lenore's mom was looking the other way, and he threw down this little rubber cat vomit on the floor, and he says, "Oh, look, your cat threw up on the," and Lenore's, "Oh my, no, don't," and my dad says, "Oh, that's okay," and he pulls out a hanky out of his pocket. She says, "No," and he wipes up this thing and sticks it back in his suit pocket, and poor Lenore's mom just about had a bird, but all right. But the Joneses, keeping up with the Joneses, all right. We want to. That's the idea is to covet what they have, or to covet above, so that I can beat those people, all right. And we see that here, that if we have these things, if Satan can. If Satan can fool us here, Jesus says, take heed and beware of covetousness. You know why he's saying beware of it? Because it's subtle. It sneaks in and you don't even notice. It comes in slowly. Everybody is doing this. Our whole society is built on what you can have. You know, you go to Leon's, you go to the Brick, and you don't pay for, 18 months. And then if you miss by one day, good luck. You're going to pay 30% all the way back to the beginning, all right? But it's all, let's have now what we can't have now. And here's all of these things that our society builds in, and Satan is very subtle in that if he can convince us that it's okay, it's not that bad, it's number 10 on the list of the Ten Commandments. And if we if he can make it normal, if he can make sin average and normal, we don't mind so much. And Jesus says, be careful here. Beware. Beware. There is a great danger here that we don't see because Satan just makes it a normal thing. If you kill somebody, then that's a federal offense. After the second or third murder, then they might throw you in jail. All right, but there's a problem with that. We look at that and we say, well, that's evil, that's vile. In some places, that's not so bad anymore. They would kill people, and they don't think anything of it because it's become a normal thing. But we look at it, at these things, it's a federal offense, and it's a provincial offense if we kill somebody or we steal or we do any of these things, but you don't go to jail for coveting. It's not a big deal. And Jesus says, wait a minute, beware, because it is a very, very, very dangerous thing. Jesus gives this parable. Let's read this parable, starting in verse 16. It says, and he spake a parable unto them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? And he said, this will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater. And there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods, and I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? So he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God, so is he. God never condemns wealth. As a matter of fact, some of the most godly men in the Word, in our Bible, were very wealthy. But understand this, too. Some other of our very most godly men in God's Word had nothing. Wealth is not a measure of how spiritual you are or even how much God loves you. All right? God loves you beyond what you can imagine, regardless of what things or what money you have. You look at one of the most, he's actually called the greatest man at that point in time. In Job chapter 1 and verse 3, he says, his substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she-asses and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. God says he was the greatest because of what he has, all right? Not so much what that isn't the reason, but showing there of how much he has. He is the most wealthy man in the East, and he is Job. He is a godly man, so much so that God says, look at my servant Job. He loves me. And God says, this is what he has. Abraham was a godly man. He had, and he was wealthy. He had 318 servants. That's not just a household, that's a company. 318. I did a little research to see how many companies in Brantford have over 300 people working for them. Well, I couldn't get the number 300, but over 200, less than 1% of all the companies in Brantford have 200 or more employees. Less than 1%. So I would think you're going to go up to 300, it's probably less than even 0.5%. But this guy's in a company, this is just a man. But God blessed Abraham. We see in Genesis chapter 13 and verse 2, it says, and Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. We see that the man who wanted Jesus to bury Jesus' body, we have Nicodemus came and Joseph of Arimathea. You know what it says about Joseph of Arimathea? He was rich. We see a couple of ladies in the New Testament. One of the ladies' name is Joanna, and the other's name is Susanna. And they helped Jesus. It says that they helped his ministry by giving from what they had. It's indicating, doesn't come right out and say that they were rich, but it says that they used what they had to help move his ministry along. They were probably wealthy ladies, and they did that. God doesn't condemn wealth, all right? And here Jesus is not rebuking this rich man because he is rich, but he is rebuking this rich man because of his attitude towards what he has, what he already has. This man made a number of big mistakes. The first of which is this: he measured his success by his material wealth. And there are many that do that, and it is easy to do. Measure how successful I am by what I possess. That's what this man was doing here. And Jesus tells us there in verse number 15, back up there, he says, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. If you were to type into a Google search, because we use this phrase. We use this phrase all the time. I mean, not we, but society uses this phrase. They will say, how much is this person worth? And you type in and say, how much is, pick a name, and say, so I did. I picked up an actor. I thought, how much is Tom Hanks worth? And it comes up, $400 million. That's what he's worth. I'll tell you what, his soul is worth a lot more than $400 million. So then I got really curious. I said, well, how much is Donald Trump worth? And they don't really know, but they guess he's somewhere around $6.5 to $7 billion that he is worth. But his soul is worth more than that. He needs to get saved. All right? Just like our prime minister needs to get saved. We need to pray to that end. I'm not saying that as a derogatory remark here. I'm saying that as that's something that we need to be praying for, our leaders to get saved. We need godly men to lead our country. We sing in our national anthem, God, keep our land. Our land's past keeping. We need to change our national anthem to God, make our land glorious and free. But Jesus here is not rebuking this man for his riches, but this man, like I said, he is having he's measuring what he's worth by what he has. I knew a man, I didn't really know him well, but I knew him and I actually have his coat. I love his coat. It's a Carhartt coat. Lenore doesn't like it, but it is rough, tough. The thing, I'll probably have it till I die. But this man had a little slogan. He said, he who has the most toys when he dies wins. That man told his wife one day, he says, I'll be back in a little while, and he drove behind a factory out in Paris, and he took his life. Did he win? Because he had lots of toys? His toys meant nothing. But that's what people do. They'll measure success by what they have. When I went on, we've gone on some missions trips with Phil Smith, and one that jumps out at me because it was the longest one away is in Samoa. And I've mentioned this a couple times. The people in Samoa, where we were, it is clearly not American Samoa. We landed in American Samoa, and then you go over to Samoa. It is a third world country. These people's houses don't even have walls. No windows, no doors, just posts and a roof in case it rains. Other than that, that's their house. It's like a pavilion in Mohawk Park. And these people have basically nothing. We were working and building some stuff there, and there's lava rock everywhere, so you got to be really careful. I tripped and fell down like I do, all right? And you land on that stuff, and it just rips your flesh off because it's so hard, just so porous and everything like that. It's everywhere. They make fences out of it just to get rid of it, because at one point, the whole island was covered in lava. It erupted, and so they dig this stuff up, and there's dirt underneath it. And we're working away, and I'm looking up there, And I got steel-toe work boots on, and you know what their steel-toe work boots are? Nothing. They're bare feet. Like, I'm like this if I'm walking on gravel with my bare feet, all right? But they have nothing. I'll tell you, you won't find many people that are happier than those people. And they've got nothing. Because you can't measure success by what you have. But he measured, first mistake he made was he measured how successful he was, sit back and eat, drink, and be merry by what he had. Big mistake. Number 2, he confused his body with his soul. Look at verse 19. He says, and I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. What does a soul need with barns and bounty? Nothing. Nothing. Your soul is eternal. Your body, what we have, it's as James says, it's here for a little time and then vanisheth away. It's just like a vapor. All right? The soul, our soul is designed and engineered by God for the spiritual part of life. The soul needs to be saved and sanctified, made like Christ. A soul needs to be fed with this. This is what it needs. It doesn't need more crops, more money, more John Deere tractors. It doesn't need that. It needs this word, okay? The soul needs fellowship with God. That's why our theme for this year is pray or be pray. Because we need to spend time, we need to spend more time with God. Our soul needs that fellowship with God. A soul needs a relationship with God. I read a story about, it was a fisherman, and it was like early in the middle of the day, like, noon, 1 o'clock, and he's just sitting beside his boat, and he's just looking out on the water, and this rich industrialist comes up to him and he says, why aren't you out there fishing? He said, I already got enough fish for the day. He says, well, why don't you go out and get more? He says, what do I need more for? I already got enough for the day. He says, well, if you get more, you could sell them and you could have more money. And then you do this often enough, and then you could get more money, you could buy a bigger boat, a better boat, another boat. And get a whole fleet of these things. Why do you do that? He says, well, then you could be rich like me. And he says, well, then when I get rich like you, what am I going to do? He says, well, then you can sit back and relax. And the fisherman said, what do you think I'm doing right now? Looking at what they have, but what we have is not the same as our soul. We need to have that relationship with God. Verse number 20, it says, but God said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? Our body, in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse number 8, says this, for bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having promise of this life that now is, and of that which is to come. It doesn't say that you shouldn't exercise, all right? You need to take care of what we have as our bodies. We need to do that. But in comparison to our soul, comparison to our spirit, it means nothing because it doesn't last. But what we do need, godliness is profitable, that little word, and that which is to come, because it's forever. Our soul, our spirit lives on forever. That's the difference between us and the sparrows that fall to the ground that God is so concerned about. They don't live forever. Okay? But we do. We are the culmination of God's creation. That's why it was last. He created everything and set it all up for his masterpiece of man, whom he was willing to die for, because that's how much he cares for us, as Jesus went on just previous to this and told them how important we are. There's a couple of fellows, and they were sitting on a park bench, and a funeral train went by of a fella in there that was big wig in the city and really, really rich. And the one fella says to the other fella, he says, "I wonder how much he left." And the other guy said, "All of it." He left it all. Because what we have here is just temporary. What we have here is temporary. This man measured success by what he had. He confused his body with his soul, and he missed this other part. He missed the understanding that our blessings have a partnership with God. The things that we have a partnership with God. We look there at the very first verse there of this parable. It says, "The ground of a certain rich man brought forth abundantly." The ground. Who's in charge of the ground? That's God. And what he had was given to him by God. And he just realized, he thought that it was all about him. And everything he had was all about him. We went through Job and Abraham, Joseph of Arimathea and Susanna and Joanna, and we talked about them being wealthy, and there's others, Solomon. And we looked at with others that had great amount of wealth, and then we look at Elijah and Elisha, who had nothing, all right? Godly man. Let's go all the way to the top. The most godly. Jesus, he is God. What did he have? Jesus says, "I don't even have a place to lay my head." All right? But what is important here, you understand, is what we have, we get from God. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, in verse number 17, it says, "Charge them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but," here's where the trust should be, "in the living God, who giveth us richly all things to enjoy." There's nothing wrong with having some nice things. God gives us those things. Why does he give us those things? He gives us those things that we should enjoy those things. But we need to, in order to really enjoy those things, in order to really enjoy what you own, what you drove here in, where you're going to go after this, into some nice place that's not, anybody live under the bridge? All right, no? Going to go to a nice warm, dry place, make some nice warm supper, warm lunch, all right? We need to understand that what we get from him. He says that who giveth to us richly all things to enjoy. There is a partnership between what we have and God. And if we lose that partnership, lose that understanding, think that it is us that has done it, like this man did, we mess up. This man's focus was on the material things that he had, with little to zero, a lot closer to the zero, thought that it came from God. That it came from God. He tells us there in verse number 21, "So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." I think of David here. We're looking at David and David's friends and foes in the evening service. I encourage you to come back. We're going to look at another neat one tonight. But I look at David and how rich he was towards God. I'm going to give you this one verse. Just want to and understand here in 1 Chronicles chapter 22 and verse 14. It's a long verse, but it says, "Now behold, in my trouble," let me back up for a second. He's talking to Solomon, all right? And he's telling Solomon, when he's going to pass it off to Solomon, he says, "I can't build the temple, all right? But, because God said that I'm a man of war, but I've done some things, and I've set some things aside for you to build the temple." And here we go. He says, "Now behold, in my trouble, I have prepared for the house of the Lord 100,000 talents of gold, and 1,000,000, that's 1,000,000 by the way, talents of silver, and of brass and of iron without weight, for it is in abundance. Timber also and stone have I prepared, and thou mayest add thereto." If that isn't enough, you can get some more and you can add that too. So we look at this and we say, what is 100,000 talents of gold? I did some numbers, because I like numbers. On Friday, 1 ounce of gold, 1 gram of gold was $221.69. So we're going to put it on sale and just say it's $221, all right? 1 gram. So that makes 1 kilogram, which is 1,000 grams, of gold worth $221,000. 1 talent is about 40 kilograms. So 1 talent of gold is worth $8,840,000 for 1 talent of gold. 8 million. How many talents of gold did he have? Did he leave? He left 100,000 talents of gold. That is not $8 billion. That is $884 billion just in gold that David set aside for God. We thought Mr. Trump was wealthy at a little under $8 billion. This is $884 billion. And what did he do with it? He set that aside for God. He got that in wars, all right? It came to him, but that's what he set it aside, not for himself. But that is being rich toward God. Now, I'm not saying that y'all got to donate $884 billion to the church, all right? $1 billion to do it. No, I'm just kidding, all right? But my point is this. His heart, when God said that I found a man after my own heart, that was David. He had lots of flaws. Don't get me wrong, he had lots of flaws. But you know what? There were some great things about that man, and he had a heart for God. Here's the point here I want to make. If we truly recognize the partnership of what we have and where it came from, and that it is a blessing from God between our things and our God, as we enjoy those things, our thoughts would be on how grateful we are to God for what he's given us. Those Samoans were grateful to God for the roof over their head. That's all they had. That's all they had. You know, we talk about having a roof over our head, but we're including walls and doors and air conditioning and heating and carpet and flooring. And they didn't have any of that. They had posts and a roof. If they wanted a little bit of privacy, they would tack up a sheet. That's it. But they recognized that this stuff came from God. We have so much here. We have so much here. And we lose sight of what it is because the Joneses have the same amount or close to their four. So we're really poor. Not even close. But we need to recognize that what we have, that God has given to us, that it came from him. We have a partnership. This man had a partnership with God. That ground that brought forth, that was God that blessed him. And what did he decide to do? I'm just going to sit back, and God's got nothing to do with this. And Jesus says, "Thou fool, you're missing the point." When God blesses, we need to be grateful to God. We need to be grateful to God. How prone are we to just praise God for our blessings? How prone are we to do that? I want to give you one more verse. Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 3. It says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee." If our mind is stayed on God, if when we get into that vehicle and we turn the key and it starts, we realize that's from God. And we drive home, we have heat, we have windshield wipers, we have going over those bumps is not so bad. Got suspension, hopefully, all right? But if we recognize that those things come from God, and we keep that in the forefront of our mind, as Isaiah says, that he'd keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed, it's there. My mind is stayed on God. I'm thinking about him. It doesn't mean you're praying 24/7. You can't do that. But we need to keep him at the forefront of our mind. My mind is stayed on him. Those things that we have, we need to understand it's not those things. It's from God. Jesus says, even those things that we have, and again, like I go back to the beginning of the message where we think that covetousness is just wanting something that somebody else has. This man isn't wanting something that somebody else has. This man is reveling in what he has that's just his. And it only came because of him and how great he is. And he's focused on the things. That's what covetousness is. Focused on the things, maybe to the point of wanting somebody else's, but even just focusing on the things that we have and missing the point of who it came from. Because what we have comes from God. Really, what we have is God's. So wanting to keep it, I guess, is coveting something that doesn't really belong to us. All right? You could look at it that way. But my point is simply this, folks. We are blessed. We are blessed beyond what any of us remotely deserve. He says, well, I work hard, and God gives you the health to do that. God gives you the ability to do that. I look around, and I am flabbergasted by the people that we have in our church that love God and are serving God in their late 70s and early 80s and so forth, and they're still, what can I do for God? Well, you're in your 80s. You're in your 70s. You should be sitting down, just relaxing and eating popcorn in front of your TV. No. They want to do something for God. They want to go for God. You know why? Because God has blessed them. God has blessed our congregation with good health. That doesn't mean that we don't have some problems. We do. But you know what? Overall, I'm just amazed at how God has given longevity to our people who want to serve Him. And we serve a great God. He has blessed us beyond what we deserve. Let's be thankful for that. When we go home, when we pick something up, when we get inside of our car, whatever we do, we need to be grateful to God and understand that it came from Him. Because this guy, God said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee, then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? All these things, they mean nothing. Not without a relationship with God. We have a great God that we need to serve. And we need to count those blessings. And we're going to sing that in just a moment. Let's pray. Precious Father, thank you for your word.